Hi there, it's Andrew here from Culloden Christian Assembly. We're just going to do a little series of interviews with various people from different backgrounds in Culloden. We're going to ask life questions and learn things about each other that perhaps we didn't know before. So if you want to grab yourself a coffee and share with us as we investigate life together, thank you for tuning in. Today, we're going to be speaking to Pamela, and she's from South Africa originally. She now lives in Scotland. So we'll ask a little bit about that background as we speak to Pam together. Thank you. Well, so you're the first of our little coffee and chats. Do you like coffee, by the way?
I used to like coffee, Andrew, but coffee didn't like me.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. So at some point I stopped.
Have you a preference then?
Yeah, I've acquired, I've gotten used to the taste of tea, so I like it now.
Okay.
Every now and then I might have a sip of Craig's coffee if he decides to have coffee, but I think I prefer tea now.
Well, I'm the same anyway. I would prefer tea. I never really got into coffee in a whole lot, but yeah, it's not that it doesn't agree with me. It's just that I don't agree with it, So anyway, so what about giving us like a short summary of who you are for the listeners?
So I'm Pamela, non-Tobago. What? Used to be Tibetan and got married to Craig. I'm from South Africa. I moved to Scotland 8 years ago. After I got married to Craig, and I'm Zulu. I'm a mum to two girls, twin girls, Elizabeth and Bethany. And yeah, what else can I say?
Yeah, well, that's pretty.
Yeah, I'm a stay-at-home mum just now, and look after the girls and look after Craig.
Lovely, lovely. Well, if would you go back to your sort of roots then for a wee while, because it's obviously very different than most folk in the Highlands.
Yes.
You probably haven't found too many others with a similar background in the Highlands. Have you found anybody actually?
I haven't found any Zulus, but yesterday I was at the park with the girls because it was such a nice day, and the girls saw another lady who's brown like me. So I didn't say anything at the time, but on the way home, Elizabeth said, "Mommy, there was a lady there that looked like you." so Elizabeth, my girls haven't seen a lot of people like me. No, they're not a lot of people like me.
Oh well. So going back to South Africa in thought for a few minutes. So you come from is it a big family background or?
Yeah, so 15 of us.
Wow. 15.
Yes. You didn't know this, Andrew. Yeah. So my mum, my dad died when I was 6, and my mum had my sister and myself at that point, and then got married to somebody who had children and then had more children.
Yeah. So
that's how I got 15 brothers.
Wow. That's a big background. Yeah. So
so I was brought up in South Africa in the 80s, and from Catholic background, and something that's quite common in I suppose with a lot of Zulus, some of them would maybe have Catholicism as a background, but there's also ancestral worship, which was kind of part of my upbringing. Didn't hear the gospel. The first time I really heard about what happens when somebody dies was when I was about 4 years old, having this conversation with my friend. I don't know why we were having this good conversation about death, but she told me that when we die, if we haven't made sure that our good deeds outweigh our bad deeds, then we would go to hell. And I remember thinking at that time, I'm in big trouble because I knew that I couldn't be good, like judging by my track record. I used to fight with my sister a lot, and just sometimes I just used to do naughty things because I felt like it. I couldn't help it. So, and I remember thinking at that time, well, I'm only 4 years old, so I don't really need to worry about this whole religion stuff. It'll be a while before I die, and I've seen that old people get religious. So maybe when I'm old, I'll before I die, I'll get religious, because it seemed to me that getting religious is an awful waste of time. From what I'd seen and from what I think people had said, it would be a very boring life. So it's the sort of thing that you did when you were old. So I thought, well, I'll get religious then, and hopefully by that time my good deeds would have outweighed my bad deeds.
Yeah. So that's sort of a common religious way of looking at the world, even from different religions, isn't it? The idea that, somehow it's a brownie point system almost, that, if you kind of keep doing good things, maybe it'll be more than the bad things you do. It's a very different message than the message of the gospel too, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yet it's a lot of people even think it is the message of Christianity, which is kind of really sad, when you actually hear the message of Christianity, of a relationship with Christ and forgiveness and those sorts of things, isn't it? Yeah. So seeing, explain to an Irish boy. I was brought up in the 80s too in Ireland, and
I know.
some parallels, but a lot of differences. What was it like to be being brought up in South Africa? What was different, would you say? Because you know a little bit about sort of the British background now. What do you think was different about being brought up in South Africa? A couple of obvious differences, say.
Yeah. So, what was different? Um, what was during
Sun.
apartheid years? That's a lot. Yeah, a lot. Apartheid years. So
Oh yes, the apartheid.
different races didn't mix.
Oh, okay, right.
And where I lived, we didn't have a shopping center. We didn't have any big shops, and it was quite a large area. You basically didn't have no libraries, no, if you can imagine a world like that. Um,
Yeah.
no libraries, no shopping centers, um, no leisure centers,
Okay.
um, no running water, no electricity, no no indoor toilets.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's a very different
Yeah,
background, isn't it?
very different. And yeah, races didn't mix.
Wow. So there were different sections, segregation. Some parts of the community would have been, whatever, white, I presume, and others.
Yeah. So just whatever race you would be with people that looked like you.
Okay. So it was a very just wow. It's it's funny because obviously I'm from Northern Ireland and we had an element of segregation. I'm from Belfast and there are peace walls and you when you drove into different communities, you couldn't drive into different communities, say after a certain time at night and things like that, in the bad times of the troubles. And so there are a few similarities there. It wouldn't be exactly the same because you could have, because you looked the same, you could have got through those areas, unless someone recognized you, but because we're Belfast and we spoke the same way, and but I suppose in that circumstance with, you'd be divided in race kind of, it must have been really quite, I suppose you didn't know anything different.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like I didn't know. I felt I was quite happy really.
Yeah.
My grand, I lived with my grand because my parents were not married when they
Okay.
had,
Mhm.
whenever they had us. They were engaged to be married, but they weren't married. So, as was custom, that's what would happen if your parents weren't married. You would live with your grandparents. So, lived with my grandparents, and they had a huge garden. And in some ways, our family was more privileged than maybe some of my friends because we got to do some of the things they couldn't do. A lot of people didn't have cars, but we had a car, so which meant sometime on weekends my dad would come and take us out to do various excursions, which was
Mm.
a lot
Mhm.
of fun. So yeah.
Yeah. Would you say there was any kind of like incidences in your, I don't know, early memories, your early childhood that shaped your life? Um, Things that you remember back, years later and think,
Yeah.
it,
Probably that conversation that I had with my friend when I was four.
yeah, right, okay.
Um, just because I remember, but like one of the things I thought after we had the conversation was, how am I ever going to know when I've done enough good?
Aye,
Like, when is that going to happen?
yeah, you never can. Sure, you can't if you're working.
Which I'm just thinking, my girls are like 3.5 now, and I'm thinking that's what I was thinking around that age. Like, wow.
Yeah, no, that's right. It is amazing, and you'll know this from having children now. What they can think about, however, it's quite interesting. But yeah, so that gave you a sense of, if you like, that there's another side. There's an after death.
Yeah,
Would
yeah.
that have been common? I mean, would there have been a lot of people that didn't believe in God in South Africa? Put it that way.
No, no. A lot of people, I'd say most people believe in God.
Mhm.
And also part of the whole ancestral, but God is a very, like, he's a distant God who's not involved. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
with the whole ancestral worship thing, what happens is somehow your dead relatives have an influence on what's
right.
happening in the world, and they can ask God and can speak on your behalf. And
Like it's like a mediator.
yeah, so they all, yeah, they're like mediators. So when they die, it's almost as if, well, you've got your family there, and they can say certain things and ask, speak to God on your behalf. Um, is kind of part of it. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, so that was my background as well. Especially my grand believed that. Um, so yeah,
Well, that's really interesting because I think there's a little bit of that coming back, even in the Western culture, with so many folks that, well, don't really know what to believe now. And I'll speak to people and they'll say, I was speaking to my mother, and their mother's been dead for 10 years, and things like that. You know what I mean? And that's quite a common, and even in Catholicism, obviously with the prayers to the saints and so on. Now, now, I mean, obviously, when you look at things from a gospel biblical perspective, you look at the Bible and it says that there's one God and one mediator
yeah,
between. There's only one that
yeah,
really can bring us into God's presence,
that's right.
and it's the Lord. But it's interesting how these like ideas from different cultures seem to be spreading in our own. I feel like the vacuum that's left with people often turning away from what their parents believed, in the Western world. I don't know. You probably come across a bit of that yourself at times.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm sure it's different in the sense that was a very definite thing, wasn't it? I mean, everybody would have done it almost. Would that?
A lot of people would have, yes, a lot of people would have done that. And
Yeah.
I think even like, because obviously there were, as my community, there would have been people that would have been Catholics, and then I think Methodists and Lutherans, and how you could usually tell where somebody, where they went was what they wore. So on Sunday, you would see people wearing either red, which those would be the Methodists, the Catholics would wear blue, and I think the Lutherans would wear like tan. Everybody, when people got serious about religion, they would wear like
Okay.
they would get a jacket like a church uniform.
Okay. It's like a uniform.
So yeah, so you could tell where if somebody was Methodist or Catholic or whatever denomination
Mhm.
by what they wore on Sunday. And a lot of people went somewhere on Sunday.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right. There's a lot of church attendance of
yeah,
some
yeah, yes,
description.
yeah,
That's interesting. So I think I'm right in saying you became a Christian when you were maybe a teenager. Am I right?
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes. I became a Christian when I was 13. when I went to Portcheston High School, a boarding school there,
Okay.
and
Uh,
I mentioned that my dad passed away when I was 6. So, and I had been really happy. I would say had been really happy up until that point. And then my dad passed away, and then a few years later, my mum my mum got married, and so then we had like a blended family, step family,
Okay. Right.
and I didn't adjust well to the changes. And I
Mhm.
think from the time, because I had been pretty happy, but from the time when I think when my father died, I that had a huge impact on me.
Can imagine.
And then, you know, a new family sort of adjusting to that as well had quite a big impact. And I just remember being angry a lot from that point, just angry with life and
Yeah.
angry with the circumstances. And then my sister I mentioned I had an older sister, so she died as well.
Yeah.
She was in uh, they went on a school trip, and the bus that she was in was involved in a
Yeah. No.
accident collision, and she died along with a few other kids. But yeah, so I have been just
That kind of trauma, I'm sure that
mm,
that affected your childhood in a real way.
yes, yes, it did, and I remember I had remembered what stuck in my mind was after I got saved when I was 13, and what attracted me to the gospel, and also up to that point, I guess I hadn't heard the gospel. All I'd known was that you know, I would be judged for my sins.
Yeah.
And I went along to the Catholic Church for, I would say, until I was about 12.
Yeah.
Um, but the thing that was strange about it all was we went to Catholic Church where the message or was in all in Latin.
Okay.
And I don't think we were like good Catholics, my family,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we like we didn't do all the we
Yeah.
just went sometimes.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Um,
So you couldn't understand.
no, I couldn't understand. It was in Latin. Like the
Yeah.
prayers were in
Yeah.
Latin.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand any of it. But I went because my friends went and
Mm.
people went. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um but yes, and the other thing was I couldn't at that yeah, before I was 13, I used to see people on Saturdays just living really immoral lives, but then people went to church on Sunday.
Okay. Yeah. So the hypocrisy of it all is that.
Yeah, oh yeah, there was a lot of that. So when I went to high school and met a girl called Tina, she was she was different to anybody I had seen. She had so much joy,
Yeah.
and she spoke about the Lord Jesus, and she spoke about like Christ, or like
Yeah.
that's all she spoke about, and it was very attractive. Like
Yeah.
a
Wow.
lot of us like girls just used to flock around Tina because she just had a winsome way of speaking about the Lord, and she had so much joy. And I wanted what she had, so I figured, well, if I hang out with her, I'll be like her. So I just used to go along to wherever she went, and a group of us girls just went along to wherever Tina went.
Wow.
And one Friday night, we heard there was something happening in the school hall, and there was a group from I think the Baptist church or like young people that came, and
Yeah.
they would they played they would play some songs and then share the gospel. So I decided, well, I'll go along to this because if you're in boarding school and there's a chance to go to
Okay.
anything
Yeah.
outside of boarding school, you went. And also Tina was going and the other
Yeah.
girls were going, so I
Yeah.
went. And that's where I heard the gospel.
Hmm.
Because I mean, from my background, I had known obviously that Christ had died,
Mm.
and I knew he was born because we celebrated Christmas. I knew that he had died because obviously we celebrated Easter. Um, but I couldn't I didn't know why.
Okay, you couldn't join the dots and
I
that.
could not make the connection. I
Yeah.
didn't, up to that point, I had not made the connection that Christ had come to die for my sins.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
hadn't. And so when I heard the gospel, they know that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him will have
Yeah.
everlasting life. So I heard the gospel and I believed it.
Yeah.
And that it finally made sense to me why. Because I had believed that he had come and
Mhm.
I believed that he had died, but I didn't know why that had happened.
Right. Okay. So
So that made sense at that point, and I trusted Lord Jesus as my
so
savior.
was that the first time you'd gone to that thing then?
Yes, that was the first time. Yeah, yeah, it
Wow.
was the first time I'd gone to that.
Hmm.
I heard the gospel. The first time I heard the gospel, it was a good message and
Yeah. Good news to a thirsty.
good news to me.
That's what it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I knew I was a sinner. It's just that I'd known I was a sinner, but
Yeah.
nobody told me.
I think this is really like one of the wonderful things about the gospel is how liberating it is. I mean, when you think of that whole religious side of things that people really get hooked up on, and brownie points and all, I've used the expression, then to find out actually, yes, I'm a sinner, but there's someone who has taken my place, someone who has been willing to die on my for me in that sense, and that he's wanting to forgive me, and he wants that relationship, a relationship rather than a religion, and a lot of people kind of lump it all together, really, I think, but yeah, that's lovely. I've never heard about that girl before. Tina, did you say her name was? Or
Yeah, her name was Tina. Yeah, she I don't know where she is. I kept in contact with her like on and off through the years, but I've kind of lost contact with
yeah,
her.
well, that's lovely. What a testimony she left, really.
Mm.
Um, so, what was it unusual? Was it unusual to be, say, a Christian in that sense in South Africa? Uh,
Um, I think
Usually
it like
normal.
I yes and no, because then after I became a Christian in high school, I discovered there were a whole lot of people that were Christians,
Okay. Oh, that's
which was just lovely. It
yeah, yeah.
was a really
Family
one
then.
of the best years of my life, I would say,
Right, okay, yeah, yeah.
as a young person. Um, just there were lots of believers like in
So
high school.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, would any in your wider family be Christians or?
Yes, my mom.
Oh, lovely.
My mom. Yeah. So she became a believer, I think, in the 90s.
Wow, that's
So yeah, my mom.
yeah, that's lovely. So, so when did you first come to the UK then?
2005.
That's maybe a bit of a leap, Obviously, you did you go into did you go to university or go into work or what way?
Yeah. So after school, I went to university and then um, started working. I went back to the school where I worked as a teacher's assistant for a year after uni,
Mhm.
and then worked at a bank. And it was at that point that I came to the UK because my best friend had come to London. She was like on a during that time, South Africa and the UK used to do like working holidays,
Okay, yeah.
so you could kind of take a sabbatical of work and come to the UK and do like 2 years of
Oh, yeah.
working and traveling. So my best friend had come. She had moved to the UK. She was based in London. So in 2005, I came over to see her and visit. But how I first came to Scotland was through Stuart Henderson.
Hmm.
Um, he had been on can't remember. There's a term now they use for medical students. Medical elective.
Elective, yes, yes, elect
He went to the same assembly that I was in when he was in South Africa.
mhm, mhm.
So he said, when if you're ever in the UK and you want to come to Scotland, maybe you could stay with my parents.
Yeah,
So
right.
that it, like I wouldn't have come to Scotland had not had that offer not been there. So
Right.
that's how I came to Scotland, because then I knew somebody and then I
Yeah.
had a place to stay. So that's how I first came to
So
Scotland.
that was the beginning of your links to Culloden, really.
Yes, and that's why
Yeah.
I first
Good.
met Craig.
John, man, man. So
Yeah.
that's lovely. Yeah. So you were over for a year or two then at that point?
So I just came for like, at that point, I came for, I think, just a couple of weeks.
Oh, right.
And I decided that maybe I wanted to do the working holiday thing as well.
Mm,
So then 2007, I came for like a longer stint, which was like 2 years. I was on a working holiday.
okay.
So I was
And
based
where
in
were you
London.
based mainly then?
Sorry, where was I
Yeah.
based?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was in London. I worked in
London.
London.
Okay. Right. Very good.
And then also came to Scotland for like, I was in the UK for 2 years, and I um, did 18 months in London and then 6 months in Scotland. I'd always wanted to do a bit of au pairing, and
Yeah.
I wanted to help out a Christian family if there was one to help out with kids. And somehow the Lord worked things out that I did. There was a Christian family that needed help with kids,
Okay.
5, and yeah, so I helped with that, which was great.
What's bringing us
I
up?
still keep in contact with them as well.
We're getting closer and closer to now.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's about a decade ago, really. I suppose. Well, 12, 13 years ago.
Yeah.
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 Um, so when you did come to the UK, what were your first impressions? What was it different in South Africa? A lot different. And what stands out? Was it the food or cold weather?
A number of things. So like I thought the people were really friendly.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah, I couldn't get over how nice the people were.
yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Hmm.
um, I told you that in South Africa there was a whole part where I grew up under apartheid,
Yeah. Yeah.
which came to an end around 94, 94, 92.
Mhm.
And as a result of that, there's still like a lot of like racism and racial tension in South Africa. So
Okay. Right.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't generally have spoken to like middle-aged people of another race, or they wouldn't have spoken to me.
Okay. Because they all came out of that
Not because they're
system.
racist, but maybe they just weren't used to
Yeah.
interacting with other races,
I know what
so
you mean.
we wouldn't speak.
Hmm.
So when I came to Scotland, I noticed how people would like people of different races, or would Scottish people would like say hello,
Yeah.
which was really nice. And but when I met people, they wanted to know me.
No. As a
Whereas
person, sort of like you just weren't. Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah.
whereas back home, I felt like people looked at you, like looked at what race you were, and I think we did it to each other. Like we would look at somebody like what race they are, and then decide from that point, maybe if you got speaking, whether you wanted to get to know them.
Yeah. Wow.
We judge people by their race.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you never really got to, yeah, you wouldn't have got to know people because there was already that barrier there of his,
Yeah. Yes. Unless the people were in like we worked with them, then
okay.
you
Yeah.
kind of got to know them, which then you
Yeah.
got past the whole race thing.
Well, it's funny. It's not too dissimilar to Northern Ireland in a sense because, I mean, where I was from in Belfast, a lot of people, there was a kind of generational thing where, um, for several generations, there'd been so much trouble between the two factions, with the loyalist or the nationalist sides, and it was interesting, looking on it now. But there was so much just like bitterness that had grown up over the years. Understandable in some ways, you could see it from both sides in the sense that there was violence on both sides. And there's so people, unless you worked with them, you often didn't have much to do with the other community, unless you know or if you both became Christians and you were in a local church together, you know, and you got to know that people are exactly the same wherever you get them, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so did you find that, like, even maybe it's going back a wee bit, but just um, there were certain places then you would say where those barriers were breaking down to some extent?
Oh, definitely. Amongst believers, there
Yeah,
were no barriers in as far as that was concerned.
that's lovely.
You
Yeah,
know, you would meet with other believers and they're just your brothers and sisters in Christ, and you felt, you know, race wasn't,
it wasn't
you're
a
part of the same family, and
absolutely. Yeah.
race wasn't a problem necessarily.
Well, that's like, you know, it's sort of the Ephesians 2 thing where it speaks about, you know, the middle wall of partition
Yeah.
that divided the Jews and the Gentiles is broken down in Christ, you know, and the beauty of the fact that when we find peace with God, we also then find a brotherhood and a sisterhood in that sense, that we're together with others in Christ. Yeah, that's good. It's good that you saw it practically worked out, is what I mean, you know, because obviously there's always tensions, and you know, because people have so much baggage, we all do. So it's good to see that it had a practical impact.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I would say, I mean, I was saying like maybe middle-aged people were, you know, I
Yeah, yeah.
didn't maybe didn't we didn't really talk, but in as far as the meeting was concerned, those were the people that were like parents to me,
Oh,
and parents to a lot of us, the teenagers that were in boarding school. They were, and some of us would call them mum and dad. The relationship was that close. They had that much care and concern for us, and there
so
weren't a lot of them were not the same race as ourselves.
wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, I like that. Um, so if I was, did I ask you about the different impressions you had of the UK? Obviously, the major one there is the friendliness.
Mhm.
What about if I was to ask you, this is an interesting question, how you feel you've changed? You're the same age as me, roughly, Pam.
I'm
Um,
older than you.
yeah, you're actually older than me. Yes, it means you're my senior here. Yeah, okay. I should be very respectful of you. Anyway, coming back to this, how do you feel like you've changed in the last 20 years as a person? Say grown in certain areas. What would you say to that? That's kind of a difficult question, maybe, but
I would say like maybe goes back even a bit further than that. I used to be unhappy.
yeah,
Now I have joy,
yeah,
which doesn't depend on circumstances necessarily. It depends on the Lord.
yeah,
The day I got saved
yeah,
was the happiest day of my life, and yeah, just that's changed. I I have joy,
yeah, absolutely.
and
Wow.
yeah,
There's
and
nothing.
a lot of things have changed as well. And I think I was very, I don't want to say legalist. I don't like saying that, but um, I think the more you grow in the knowledge of the Lord, you realize what like I've realized that I'm a sinner and I need God's grace, and every day, every moment. I think I used to be a lot like black and white, very black and white about issues. If I believed in
Yeah,
something, then
what you mean, yeah.
if somebody thought any different, they were definitely wrong. And
Yeah, we're
I
going.
think that's changed a little bit.
Yeah, I found that happening with myself a bit too. There's this the kind of sense in which you learn how little you know about some things in life, and you learn how much you can learn from others almost as you go on. I mean, I had a very close family member of mine was my aunt. She was really more like a granny to me. She'd brought up my dad after my dad's mum had passed away when he was young. So she was really more like my granny. She was a bit older than my dad. But I got saved when I was 18, and I only knew her really 3 or 4 years after I was a Christian. And yet she was such a godly lady in lots of ways. And I would have been spouting off about all that I knew and learned. And it's only now I wish it's just sat and listened more, you know. I did benefit a lot from her, but I always think, Andrew, Andrew, why didn't you? And yet she would have graciously just let me do that. And that's maybe part of the training, is learning your own your own limitations, isn't that right?
Mm.
Well, that's lovely, actually. Yeah, yeah. You've got a lovely little family now. Twin girls, and Craig, of course. Now, you probably wouldn't appreciate me calling them lovely, but yeah. So how, maybe just give us a short idea as to how you met Craig, who's a Highlander. He's from well, Inverness, here, I suppose. So how did you meet Craig then?
So, so I mentioned Stuart Henderson earlier.
Oh yes,
So
yeah.
yeah, so Craig was Stuart Henderson's housemate,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
and so that's how I met Craig.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to know him, well, know him a little bit because we used to do things in like group setting. Whenever I came up to Inverness,
Okay.
I made a number of friends with believers in Culloden,
Mm-hmm.
and then we used to, the young people, we used to do things together, and Craig was part of that. So I got to spend a little bit of time with Craig in a group setting. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I
So
think
that's
there's
how
a whole
I
story
got
to unpack there, isn't there, Pam?
yeah, that's how I got to know him.
Another chat, I think, in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe we'll get Craig along for that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Aye. Well, so you got married. What year was it then?
2013, same year as you.
It was the same year as us. It was a few months before us. That's right.
Yes, that's right. You got married in June. We got married in April.
Yeah, yeah. Because that was the reason why we couldn't come in many ways, you know. But there was quite a contingent went down to South Africa, I believe. And yeah, I'm sure that was an interesting mix of cultures.
That was interesting.
Was there any interesting, like, any laugh out loud moments in that that you can actually pass on?
There was one, but I can't really.
I can imagine. Yeah. So your career, you were involved in marketing, marketing
Yeah,
executive, and that kind of thing. Yeah.
sales. So before I came to the UK, I worked for a company in South Africa. I worked as an account manager, so it was sales.
Sales.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And
sales.
do you miss it?
No,
No.
I miss the people. I loved the relationship, the relationships
Okay.
I built with the people.
Yeah.
I don't miss the job, the pressures of the job. I don't. I think the thing that I disliked about it most was the whole the entertainment side of things when it came to sales, because it's some, you had to do some entertaining your clients,
Yeah.
and I found that really awkward, and as a believer as well, it was difficult for me.
Right.
That's just what I was uncomfortable with that aspect of it.
Okay. So
Yeah.
there's some aspects of it you wouldn't have felt comfortable with.
Yes. Yes.
It was kind of whining and dining and that.
Yes, that's right. Yes, which I wasn't very comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Although I did like forming relationships with people.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And well, so you said you're a stay-at-home mum now. That's just
Yes, I am. Yes,
your
said
career.
listen to Bethany. They are 3.5, and they keep me busy from the sun rises until the sunset.
Well, I know a bit about it.
I love it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a career in itself, isn't it?
It is. There's a lot of things involved, I guess. Feeding them, teaching them.
Yeah,
But I think it's a huge privilege as well, and I'm just so thankful to the Lord for the opportunity to be a mom and to do the things that I'm able to do with them. Just being able to teach them about the Lord, just and under normal circumstances, when they're fighting, when they're,
Yeah.
just being able to explain the gospel and even explain basic things about nature
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
in everyday circumstances. It's a huge, huge privilege to be able to do that. Love being a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah. Well, so any other unusual hobbies or interests or something you want to tell us about?
No, I am just plain boring. Right? I don't have any. I
You're
don't have
definitely not
any
boring, Pam.
unusual. Don't have any unusual hobbies, and um, I like writing. I used to like writing, but I find it's quite difficult now with having the girls.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
it,
You did a blog, didn't
it
you?
sorry.
You did a blog for a while.
I did, yes, I did. But as soon as I had the girls, it's just with all that's involved, I couldn't manage to do it.
Mhm.
And yeah, and we're home educating the girls now as well, so
Okay.
that takes up a lot of time and a lot of planning and a lot of
Yeah. Yeah.
it's difficult. A lot of, yeah, especially like these years. Maybe it's something I'll be able to take up later on.
Aye, well, that's it.
Um,
It's a good thing to even have an interest in for. And I suppose, as they say, there's different sort of times in your life when things can be set aside and lifted up. And
yeah.
whatever. Okay, so I must draw this to a conclusion. It's been good. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I mean, maybe more generally, if you had, a life message for others, in the sense of, you know, if you had someone coming alongside you as a younger girl, just any younger girl really, um, what would you want to communicate to them about life? Is that
There's only one life to live. It will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last.
okay? Right? Yeah, yeah. So
It's,
the
it's,
centrality of the Lord in that sense in your life. Yeah, yeah. That's great, Pam. Really enjoyed this.
yeah,
Um,
thanks, Andrew. Thanks for asking me to have a chat. It's been really
uh,
good.
yeah, yeah. So I'm sure everybody will be interested in watching this. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Andrew.